Good evening. This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It's Monday, April 28th. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio. It's good to be back with a quick show because, in case you haven't heard, the gender conversation is ongoing. It's a flashpoint. It's all over the news. The latest being Representative Laurel Libby, the state representative from Auburn, had filed today an application with the United States Supreme Court to rule on her emergency application to speak and vote in the Maine House because she was censored, disciplined, silenced by the Maine House and the Speaker of the House as a punishment for posting a Facebook photo of a transgendered athlete. And it's been the subject of a lot of news. It's been through various courts. She now is asking the Supreme Court for a ruling to let her vote and speak. So we'll see what happens. Also, of course, in the news is Maine suing the Trump administration and the Trump administration suing Maine because of alleged violations of Title IX because of our gender identity and gender expression laws that were passed just really everything's happened in the last 4 years. What's interesting about Laurel Libby's case is that she is represented by a lawyer named Patrick Strawbridge, and he is well known because, for one, he represented Donald Trump before the United States Supreme Court, but also he's a member of the Federalist Society and was a former law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and he also was a clerk for Maine Supreme Judicial Court Justice Howard Dana. So he has a Maine connection. He's obviously admitted to practice in Maine and representing Laurel Libby, and will be representing her if the Supreme Court takes up her case. We'll see. But you can't miss gender if you just open up, the newspaper and what's been the topic of conversation, in addition to all the litigation and talk about Maine's gender expression identity laws, is in the UK. The headlines, in case you haven't heard, the United Kingdom Supreme Court, the highest court in the United Kingdom in England, ruled that trans women are not included in the definition of women. And what was really interesting about that, and this is what we were talking about in Cape Elizabeth on a Facebook page before we got shut down, is that the law in England that the High Court just ruled on, that sort of sent shockwaves out, I think, to a lot of organizations, because there had just been this drumbeat of legislation really rolling back women's rights, in my mind. And this law in England was similar to the one that we passed in Maine, and to create gender parity on corporate boards. And the gist of it being the law would regulate how many female directors on a board of directors for a public corporation there has to be. And female was defined in England. In England, they used woman, but woman was defined to include transgender women. And this group, For Women Scotland, headed, at least, in large part by J.K. Rowling, challenged the law. And at first, the Scottish High Court said, no, transgendered women are included in the definition. They took it up to the United Kingdom. The big court in England said that the Scots had outstepped their bounds and ruled that no, the definition of woman is based on biological sex. And it's an 88-page decision, and it's very well reasoned. And that law to create gender parity in England was basically shipped overseas. It was first passed in California and Illinois. And lo and behold, in the Maine legislature, just in, a couple years ago, really, in 2021, a representative from South Portland, right next door, Lois Galgay-Reckitt, you might have heard of her, activist, a long time, kind of left activist woman. I thought very highly of her. She's now dead. She sponsored an act to bring gender parity. And what she said in her testimony was, well, she saw that these laws had passed in California and Illinois and, apparently overseas. And she said, when I read about the first in the nation law to require gender parity on corporate boards back in 2019, it got me thinking, why not Maine? So it's like, oh, shucks, sure, let's just change the law and require a certain number of females on corporate boards, but nobody mentioned that the definition of female suddenly was subjective, that female means anybody who self-identifies as a woman, which is brand new to the law, okay, brand new, and it wasn't analyzed. Not a single person spoke to the bill. Not a single transgendered person came and said, it's really important to me that female is defined to include anyone who thinks they are, including transgendered women. So we have this law in place, and it's essentially based on, California and Illinois, and it's dangerous. And we know it's dangerous because in England, in Scotland, when the law was making its way before the Supreme Court ruled on the definition of woman, it had already been implemented. And in many places, women were being abused, assaulted, raped, traumatized because bad guys were taking advantage of a loophole that said anyone who identifies as a woman can enter a women's only space. And so what the Supreme Court in England did was preserve women's rights in women's spaces, defining women on the basis of biological sex after a series of bad things had happened. So we have this law in Maine. Nobody knew really that it passed. And, and I think we should change it. I mean, I think we should change it. You do research in the law, and this is the first time, as far as I can tell, that the word female, when it applies to humans, is being defined in this way. So, and it's defined as female, in quotes, means anybody who self-identifies as a woman, regardless of their biology, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but that's exactly what it is. And in like several other instances in Maine law, female is taken for the obvious meaning when it applies to animals. We have laws in Maine that give lobsters, if you're a female lobster, well, it's illegal to harvest you. We have, the law makes male and female dogs and cats, obviously differentiated on the basis of biology. We have a law that egg-bearing lobsters, any female lobster marked with a V notch and the right flipper next to the middle flipper, or any female lobster that is mutilated, you get in trouble for these things. Pheasants, Maine law, the commissioner shall establish a rule hunting season for male pheasants that disallows taking of female pheasants in certain areas and certain times. I mean, it's just common sense, but it also is really, really important because there's laws like in transporting female clients to and from medical appointments. And when I mean clients, that's a nice way of saying prisoners. They changed the word prisoners to clients. So there's a law in Maine that says, if you're going to transport a female prisoner to and from a medical appointment, the law says that you're supposed to allow that if a correctional officer has to be with this female, then the correctional officer has to be female. So under the new law that was just passed, that means that a woman prisoner who's being taken to a medical appointment can be accompanied by anyone who believes they're a woman, or a woman prisoner who is going to give birth and has to have a correction officer nearby. Well, now it can be anybody who expresses themselves to be a woman. And, you may think like, oh, you're exaggerating. Nothing bad could happen. But like bad things happened in England. A woman was raped in the hospital. Nobody believed her, but until they saw the security tapes. I mean, predators prey on people and predators take advantage of loopholes. And so the thing that really worries a lot of women is that there's been a rollback of women's rights in the name of a campaign that is faceless. There's been no group that has actual stories of transgendered people demanding that they be identified as female. It's just kind of this made-up cause that's causing all kind of havoc, and Democrats refuse to talk about it. They refuse to talk about it. I've sent communication to our state senator because she was the chair of the Judiciary Committee that passed this bill, and I haven't gotten a response. She also was the sponsor of a bill that erased the word woman and substituted person and supported this Equal Rights Amendment, which has been completely butchered from its original intent to guarantee equal rights on the basis of sex. We now have an Equal Rights Amendment it was just voted on, that says, equal rights on the basis of gender expression and gender identity, among 1,000 other things. So it's essentially meaningless. But what it does is it enshrines in Maine law this notion that sex is a choice, that you can choose sex and that you can change sex. And there's just a whole body of law, a body of science, and a group of people, and a body of case law, and now this decision from the UK that establishes that, women are differentiated from men on the basis of sex, but keeping in mind protections still contained in the law in England as well as the law here for people who identify as transgendered. It doesn't, that you still have protections. It's just on the basis of your status of being transgender. So instead of saying, you're a woman, you can still say it. It's just that the definition of women in the law should stay, on the basis of sex. So this is a conversation that's taking place in Cape Elizabeth, one of the most affluent communities in the state where I live, where the studio is. There's a couple of Facebook pages. And if the topic comes up about a law that was just passed and voted on by our elected representatives, people in the community go absolutely batshit crazy. They can't handle the conversation and move quickly and really aggressively to shut it down. And so as a town, we had this ongoing debate. There's hundreds of comments. And instead of meeting the argument on its merits, instead of advocating for a position that female, just on this one gender parity law, just this one law that purports to create opportunities for women on corporate boards by requiring a ratio of male to female and then defines females to include essentially males. So that's the topic. And to just get people to focus on the unfairness to women, to define them as somehow a subjective entity that anybody, anywhere can identify as a woman is just, contrary and offensive to a lot of women. And so just to have this conversation about why it's important for women and girls' rights to be respected, while it's important to acknowledge in the law the truth that sex is between men and women. Of course, there's exceptions, but in science and generally in the law, the exception doesn't make the rule. And like I said, in all other areas of the law, male and female is taken for granted as meaning, Black's Law Dictionary defines female as, I wrote it on a little sticky. What is it? The sex which conceives and gives birth to young. So it's pretty simple, and it doesn't exclude anyone. Everybody is born with a biological sex, and everybody can, and like on top of that, express whatever gender they want. Those two things can happen at once. We can, as a society, walk and chew gum. We can protect women's rights, and we can protect the rights of people who identify as transgender. And that's what I'm working on, and that's what we're having conversations about. But in Cape Elizabeth, the Friends of Cape Elizabeth Facebook page of 1.7 thousand people had a poll that lasted about, 24 hours or something, and maybe 125 people voted. And because I think maybe like 50% of people said they don't want political posts of that very, very, very small sample. So the administrators of the Facebook page shut it down. So, we don't, how are we going to move forward? How can we move forward if we can't talk about how our representatives are voting on laws that affect, like, women and girls' rights, the rights of transgendered people? I think transgendered people can handle the truth. I think we can have the debate, but, we have to engage people, in this argument. There was a case that went up to the United States, the UK Supreme Court, that was decided. And you have to assume that if you share the opinion of the highest court of England, that you're not completely unreasonable. And that's what a lot of people do. A majority of the country agrees with the Court of England. And so the Democrats they took the wrong path on this issue, and they just will not back down, despite there being no constituency that's really dying for this. That there's been no demonstration of how it would harm anyone by simply sticking with the definition of female as it's generally understood in law, science, um, everywhere. There's just been this manipulation of language by these ideologues, these gender ideologues that society has, I think, has had it. And the gender ideology that has just been like a wet blanket is really wearing thin, and people are not going to tolerate being policed in their language, being told what to say, being told who they, what words they can use. I mean, kids shouldn't be labeled. There's no reason to label yourself. Everyone deserves equal protection under the laws, and women, um, deserve to be recognized as biologically separate and entitled to women-only space based on biological sex. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the group that won the legal fight in England was called For Women Scotland, and their basic beliefs were that sex matters, that you can't choose sex or change it, and really for the advocacy and protection of women and girls' rights. And so that's what I think we want to do here. And so I started a Facebook group and a page for Women Maine, and I hope to tackle this issue just focused on the definition of female in the law, because it just blows my mind that this happened to us, that the definition of female went as to somehow being subjective, that anybody who self-identifies as a woman, because that just opens up the door to just the mess we see. No women's sports, no women's only spaces, no women's only healthcare, no women's only counseling sessions. I mean, just no protections for women. And what's ironic is that the concerns raised by people on this Facebook group who said, they want to hear about it, and they kept accusing me of being a bigot for agreeing with the High Court of England that women, are, and that transgender people should be protected based on their own status. They're concerned about the bathroom thing, because I think they said that the concern is that if trans women, right, men who have gender dysphoria and identify as women, if they have to use the men's bathroom, that's the concern, is that it's unsafe for these trans women to use the gents, that's what they say in the UK, to use the men's room. So think about that. Well, why would it be unsafe for them to use the men's room? Oh, because men generally are predators, you know? Well, why should women? So, to protect these trans men, we have to invite men into the ladies' room, when the whole reason why they don't want to use the men's room is because generally men are, can be kind of creeps. Well, I think the men can step up. I think we can protect transgender people and still have ladies' rooms, still have spaces that are just reserved for women. I think we can do both. And I want to do both, and I hope you'll join me. And until next time, this is Cynthia Dill signing off. Take care.